This video encompasses topics 8, 9, 10, and 11 of Unit 1, dealing with ecosystems and particularly energy flow and food chains. Start with the basics. Energy is the currency that runs everything. So living things have to pay taxes, that's our analogy, on energy income. The sun is the source of most of the energy on Earth's surface. And life can be organized into different ways to demonstrate how energy flows through an ecosystem. So we'll visit all of these things in a little more detail. Let's take a look at primary productivity. What is it? It's the rate at which solar energy is converted into organic compounds through photosynthesis over a unit of time. Well, that's kind of a fancy way of saying it's the amount of plant matter growing in a given area. So how much of that solar energy is being converted into the actual physical growth of plants? When we start looking at gross versus net primary productivity, there's two different types. Gross is the total rate of photosynthesis in a given area. When you think about your paycheck, it's the total amount that you should receive for the work that you've done. Net primary productivity is the amount of energy stored in primary producers after subtracting the energy lost to respiration. So remember that these plants also need to undergo cellular respiration in order to grow themselves. It's like the after taxes. It's like when you get your paycheck and you've paid your taxes, it's the amount that you get. It's your net. If we look at some different ecosystem types, it's not hard to see. The greener the environment, the more net primary productivity. So tropical forests and temperate forests should be no surprise that they have higher net primary productivity, whereas desert's going to be very, very low. Same is true for aquatic systems. Swamps and marshes and coral reefs are going to have a lot more primary productivity than something like the open ocean. If we look at trophic levels in the 10% rule, when we start with level 1, we have our producers. And if 100% of the energy is there in the producers, no matter what they are, only 10% of that energy moves on to the next level. So whether that's the mouse or a bird. And then only 10% moves up to the secondary consumers, such as pandas or bald eagles. And then 10% of that moves up to the tertiary consumers. Notice that some can be both tertiaries or quaternary consumers, and we very rarely go past 4. I've never seen it go past 4 because we just don't have enough energy transfer up from those bottom levels. If we're looking at food chains versus food webs, a food chain is the relationship of how energy is transferred up the trophic levels. It's important to note the direction of the arrow. The arrow always points as to who gets the energy. So if you look at it, it always is pointing like from the producers to the primary consumers. If we take a look at a food web, it's a visual map of feeding relationships and energy flow. So it includes many different organisms at all the various levels, but it's greatly simplified. It leaves out the majority of species. Again, notice the arrows always from the energy where it is flowing into. That's important. So here's a food web in the simplified terms. And here's more specifically of what this same food web would look like if we took into account all the different interactions. So food webs, even though they might look complicated like the one on the left, it's very simplified when we actually think about what's going on and we look at the one on the right. So let's recap. Terrestrial and near-surface aquatic biomes get their energy from the sun. Productivity is a measure of the amount of solar energy converted into plant tissues. How much of that green stuff is growing? The communities in an ecosystem can be divided into trophic levels based on the available energy and biomass. And only 10% of the total energy is ever available to pass from one trophic level to the next, which is why we often stopped at 4. Food chains and food webs show energy flow at different scales, and it's important to know the direction of the arrow, which points in the direction of that energy flow.